The revolution in how wars were fought at night didn't start on battlefields, but in American laboratories. The infrared sniper scope project got going in 1943 when the National Defense Research Committee recognized they needed some kind of night vision capability. The Radio Corporation of America, RCA, had been working on image intensifier tubes since the middle of the 1930s, and by 1943 they'd created something called the 1P25 tube that could convert invisible infrared light into images people could see. The system had several parts working together. There was an infrared spotlight mounted above the carbine barrel that put out light the human eye couldn't detect. The scope contained the image intensifier tube that could pick up this infrared light and turn it into a visible image with a green tint. Then there was a heavy battery pack the soldier wore on his back, connected to the weapon with a cable. The whole setup weighed somewhere between 28 and 30 pounds, which was heavy, but it gave something that was priceless at the time, the to see and shoot targets when there was no light at all. The T3 carbine was an experimental designation for a modified M2 carbine that they'd fitted with this infrared system. When they tested it at Aberdeen Proving Ground, operators were hitting man-sized targets 80% of the time at 70 yards in complete darkness. That was revolutionary accuracy for night combat. The effective range went from 70 yards in poor conditions up to 125 yards when everything was working well. By late 1944, they'd started limited production. RCA manufactured around 1,700 infrared scopes during the war, and about 150 complete T3 systems made it to the Pacific Theatre by spring of 1945. The weapons arrived with security protocols that were incredibly strict. Only specially selected marksmen got trained on the system. They weren't allowed to discuss the equipment with anyone, even other American forces. The Battle of Okinawa kicked off on the 1st of April in 1945, and it would become the first major test of infantry night vision in combat. Army units involved in the invasion, particularly the 96th Infantry Division and 7th Infantry Division, got the first shipments of T3 carbines in early April. Distribution was limited, typically 2 carbines per rifle company in sectors where they expected night infiltration. The Army's official history of Okinawa says the infrared sniper scope proved immediately effective against Japanese night infiltration tactics. The after-action report from the 96th Infantry Division noted that enemy night infiltration, which had been their most serious tactical problem, had been largely neutralized by new equipment that allowed engagement of targets in darkness. That first night of combat, going from April 1st into April 2nd in 1945, Japanese forces launched their traditional night infiltration attacks against American positions. These attacks had been devastatingly effective throughout the entire Pacific War, but they met something new. American soldiers with infrared sniper scopes could clearly see Japanese soldiers moving in what those soldiers believed was concealing darkness. A report from the 7th Infantry Division described the psychological impact, saying enemy forces showed confusion and disorganization when they got hit by accurate fire in complete darkness, that traditional infiltration tactics were abandoned after they started taking casualties. The infrared system worked on a principle that was simple but revolutionary. The infrared spotlight was essentially a sealed beam lamp with an infrared filter that projected a cone of invisible light up to 150 yards. This light bounced off objects and got captured by the scope's image intensifier tube. The 1P25 tube that RCA manufactured amplified this infrared light and converted it to visible wavelengths, showing the operator a green-tinted but clear image of the battlefield. Technical Sergeant John Murray from the 96th Infantry Division was one of the first trained sniper scope operators, and he described what it was like in an interview done in 1985 with the Army's Centre of Military History. He said looking through that scope at night was like nothing he'd ever experienced, that Japanese soldiers appeared as bright green figures against darker backgrounds. You could see their faces, see their rank insignia, identify what weapons they were carrying. They moved carefully and professionally, using excellent infantry tactics, but they had absolutely no idea that anyone could see them. Murray said the psychological advantage was as big as the technological one. The Japanese had owned the night for 3 years, and they moved with complete confidence in darkness. Watching them through the scope, you could see that confidence in how they moved. Then when they fired, you'd see the confusion and panic. The Japanese couldn't understand how Americans could see them. The infrared spotlight was completely invisible to the naked eye, which meant Japanese forces never saw what was coming. Operators got trained to fire single shots or short bursts, then immediately move to a different position. This made return fire impossible, even if Japanese forces could figure out the general direction incoming fire was coming from. Within a week of the invasion starting, Japanese night operations on Okinawa had dropped dramatically. The 32nd Army defending Okinawa under General Mitsuru Ushijima had planned extensive night counterattacks as part of how they'd defend the island. These plans got largely abandoned after the first week's casualties. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara was the senior operations officer of the 32nd Army and one of the few senior officers who survived the battle. He wrote in his memoir, published in 1973, called The Battle for Okinawa, that their night assault units, which had never failed in 3 years of war, were being eliminated before they could reach American lines. He said the Americans possessed some capability they didn't understand. While Yahara's memoir doesn't specifically mention infrared technology, he probably never learned exactly what the American capability was, but he documented the complete breakdown of Japanese night operations. Units that had specialized in night combat refused to leave their caves after dark. The sophisticated infiltration tactics that had been refined over decades got abandoned. The Army's Operations Research Office calculated that during the first week of combat on Okinawa, infrared-equipped units accounted for roughly 30% of all Japanese casualties from small arms during night operations, despite representing less than 1% of American weapons. This extraordinary effectiveness led to rapid changes in how Japanese forces operated. Declassified technical reports from 1945 show both what the infrared sniper scope system could do and what its limitations were, limitations that Japanese forces never discovered or figured out how to exploit. The battery system used heavy lead-acid cells similar to car batteries, which limited operation to 20 or 30 minutes of continuous use, though using it intermittently could stretch that to several hours. The weight, nearly 30 pounds for everything, made rapid movement difficult. Operators were essentially fixed-position specialists rather than mobile infantry. Weather affected performance significantly. Heavy rain cut effective range down to under 40 yards. Fog and smoke scattered infrared light and created halos that made it hard to see targets. White phosphorus, which was commonly used in combat, rendered the system temporarily useless. But Japanese forces, not knowing what the technology actually was, never systematically tested these conditions. The infrared spotlight, while invisible to the naked eye, could theoretically be detected by someone looking directly at it through certain optical devices with coated lenses. Some Japanese naval binoculars actually had the capability to detect infrared, but Japanese forces never realized this or developed procedures to detect it. As the Okinawa campaign went on, American forces refined how they used the infrared sniper scopes. The 7th Infantry Division developed what they called infrared ambush, positioning the devices to cover likely infiltration routes like trails, water sources, and gaps in wire obstacles. These positions would stay dark and silent until Japanese forces entered the kill zone, then engage with devastating accuracy. The after-action report from the 96th Infantry Division described their employment, saying sniper scope operators were positioned to provide interlocking fields of observation, that primary sectors were assigned with overlap to ensure complete coverage of defensive frontage, and that operators engaged targets of opportunity while reporting larger formations for artillery or mortar fire. Another innovation was psychological warfare through selective engagement. Some infiltration attempts would be allowed to pass without being touched, while others were completely eliminated. This randomness created paralyzing uncertainty among Japanese forces, who never knew whether they were being watched. The limited number of devices, around 150 for the entire Okinawa operation, meant careful tactical distribution. Priority went to sectors where night infiltration was most likely, like gaps in lines, supply routes, water points, and approaches to command posts. The scarcity actually made it more effective by creating uncertainty about where the capability existed. Japanese intelligence desperately tried to understand the American night fighting capability. Captured Japanese documents from Okinawa that got translated by the Allied translator and interpreter section reveal various theories about American night fighting that ranged from partially correct to completely fantastic. One intelligence report from the 62nd Division, dated April 20, 1945, speculated that Americans might possess infrared detection equipment similar to aerial photography devices, and suggested as a countermeasure that movement during rain might degrade effectiveness. This was remarkably close to the truth, but without understanding the active infrared spotlight component, Japanese forces couldn't develop effective countermeasures. Another report suggested Americans had developed some kind of drug that enhanced night vision, which led to experiments with massive vitamin A consumption among Japanese troops. Some units tried covering themselves with mud to reduce body heat, incorrectly assuming thermal detection was involved. The most accurate assessment came from a captured Japanese technical officer's notebook, which said Americans use artificial light invisible to human eyes, amplify returned reflections through optical device. Recommend investigation of infrared detection methods. This analysis was essentially correct, but by the time it was written in late May, Japanese forces on Okinawa were already effectively defeated. Even more significant than the direct casualties caused by infrared sniper scopes was the psychological effect. The mere possibility that Americans could see in the dark paralyzed Japanese operations across sectors where no infrared capability actually existed. This force multiplier effect was even greater than the direct tactical impact. Japanese units avoided night operations everywhere, not just where infrared devices were present. The 10th Army's intelligence section noted in their summary that the enemy had largely abandoned night infiltration tactics, that prisoners reported fear of American ability to see in darkness, and that this capability, whether real or perceived in any given sector, had neutralized a primary enemy tactical advantage. The collapse of night combat capability had effects that cascaded through Japanese defensive plans. The 32nd Army's strategy had relied heavily on night movement to resupply forward positions, evacuate wounded, and conduct reconnaissance. Without the ability to move safely in darkness, Japanese forces became increasingly isolated in their defensive positions. Supply lines that had operated under cover of darkness were cut. Units in forward caves and bunkers couldn't be resupplied or reinforced. The sophisticated defense in depth that General Ushijima had planned became a series of isolated strongpoints that could be reduced individually. The Army's official history noted that the Japanese inability to operate at night, whether from actual infrared observation or fear of it, contributed significantly to speeding up the campaign. Positions that might have held for weeks were isolated and reduced in days. The training materials for infrared sniper scope operators that got declassified in the 1990s reveal how thorough American preparation was. Operators went through 40 hours of specialized training that included theory of infrared light and image intensification, equipment maintenance and troubleshooting, target identification and range estimation in green-tinted imagery, battery management and power conservation, tactical employment and positioning, and security procedures to prevent capture. The technical manual, designated TM5-9341 and called Sniper Scope Set Infrared M2, emphasized that operators were supposed to destroy the equipment rather than allow it to be captured. Each device came with thermite grenades specifically for destruction if the position was about to be overrun. This extreme security measure shows how valuable they considered the technology. Operators were selected from expert marksmen who demonstrated emotional stability and could work independently. The psychological burden of killing enemies who couldn't see them was recognized early on. Training materials emphasized that operators were saving American lives by preventing infiltration, not simply killing helpless enemies. The American infrared sniper scope wasn't developed in isolation. German forces had parallel development with their ZG-1229 Vampir system for the STG-44 assault rifle. However, the German system saw only limited deployment in the final months of the war in Europe, primarily used by Panzergrenadier units during the fighting in the Ardennes and the Rhine crossings. The American achievement wasn't just in developing the technology, but in successfully deploying it in significant numbers to the Pacific Theater, training operators, and maintaining operational security. The Japanese, despite having their own advanced optical industry with companies like Nippon Kogaku, which later became Nikon, hadn't pursued infrared technology for infantry applications. This technological gap represented a broader pattern in the Pacific War. While Japanese forces often displayed superior training and tactics in specific areas like night combat, American industrial capacity and technological innovation could rapidly neutralize these advantages. The infrared sniper scope was a perfect example of a technological solution to a tactical problem. While many specific Japanese testimonies remain unverified or were created as composite accounts, American combat reports provide clear evidence of how effective the infrared sniper scope was. The regimental journals from the 7th Infantry Division for April 1945 contain numerous entries describing successful night engagements at ranges that had previously been impossible. One verified account from the 96th Infantry Division describes an engagement on April 15, 1945, where a sniper scope operator engaged an enemy patrol of approximately 12 individuals at 23:30 hours at a range of approximately 75 yards. 8 enemy were killed, the remainder fled, there were no friendly casualties, and the enemy showed no awareness of observation before engagement started. Another report from the 7th Infantry Division dated April 28, 1945, said an infrared-equipped position reported and engaged an enemy supply party moving along a trail at 02:30. 6 enemy were killed, supplies were destroyed by subsequent mortar fire directed by the sniper scope operator, and the enemy hadn't attempted to use that trail in the nights since. Unable to operate effectively on the surface at night, Japanese forces retreated deeper into Okinawa's extensive cave systems. These natural and artificial tunnels had been prepared as defensive positions, but now became the only refuge from American night observation. Colonel Yahara's memoir describes this adaptation, saying their forces were reduced to remaining in caves during darkness, that surface movement was authorized only during daylight under concealment, and that this reversal of their traditional tactics was devastating to morale. This forced adaptation created its own problems. The tunnel systems, while extensive, weren't fully connected. Units became isolated, unable to coordinate or resupply effectively. The sophisticated defense in depth that had been planned for Okinawa collapsed into isolated pockets of resistance. Disease spread rapidly in overcrowded caves. Supplies couldn't be distributed. Units lost cohesion. The defensive network that was supposed to protect Japanese forces became a series of traps. While the infrared sniper scopes didn't directly cause all these problems, they forced the tactical adaptation that led to these conditions. The battle for Shuri Castle in late May 1945 demonstrated the complete reversal of night combat dynamics. Shuri, the ancient castle that served as General Ushijima's headquarters, was supposed to be defended by sophisticated night counterattacks. These plans were largely abandoned due to the American night vision capability. The 1st Marine Division history records that expected night counterattacks during the Shuri battle never materialized, that the enemy confined offensive action to daylight hours or dawn and dusk periods. That night, defensive positions were abandoned without a fight, and that prisoners indicated fear of American night observation capability. By June 1945, as the Okinawa campaign entered its final phase, Japanese forces had completely abandoned their traditional night tactics. General Ushijima's final order, issued June 18, 1945, acknowledged this reality by prohibiting night surface operations except for final defensive stands where survival wasn't expected. The statistics from the entire campaign showed the dramatic impact. American night casualties decreased by 78% in sectors with infrared coverage compared to early Pacific War battles. Japanese night operations, which had been their primary tactical advantage since 1942, effectively ceased to exist. After Japan surrendered, American technical intelligence teams conducted extensive analysis of Japanese responses to infrared technology. The Strategic Bombing Survey, which included interviewing Japanese military leaders, found that while many were aware Americans possessed some form of night vision capability, none understood its exact nature. The Far East Command's study on Japanese night combat, published in 1946, concluded that the introduction of infrared viewing devices effectively neutralized Japanese night fighting capabilities on Okinawa, that this single technological advantage disrupted tactical doctrine developed over 40 years and contributed materially to accelerating the campaign. Former Japanese officers who got interviewed by occupation forces consistently cited the loss of night combat capability as one of the most demoralizing aspects of the Okinawa battle. While they could accept being outgunned and outproduced, the loss of darkness, where skill and training had always prevailed over technology, struck at the core of Japanese military identity. The infrared sniper scope's success on Okinawa led to continued development and deployment in Korea. By 1950, improved versions with better range and battery life were standard equipment. The M3 carbine with infrared scope became a specialized tool for defending fixed positions against night infiltration. During the Korean War, Chinese and North Korean forces, many of whom had been advised by Japanese veterans of Okinawa, initially avoided night operations against American forces because they believed all U.S. units possessed night vision. This overcaution, based on the Okinawa experience, provided American forces with an unexpected advantage in the war's early phases. The psychological legacy of Okinawa's night battles influenced communist tactical doctrine throughout the Korean conflict. Only after discovering that most American units lacked night vision did communist forces resume large-scale night operations. Even then, the fear persisted. Every unexplained night casualty got attributed to American infrared technology. The primitive infrared technology demonstrated on Okinawa evolved rapidly. The active infrared system that required an infrared spotlight got gradually replaced by passive systems that amplified available light. By Vietnam, starlight scopes could function using only moonlight or starlight, eliminating the need for active illumination that could potentially be detected. Modern night vision has progressed through multiple generations, from the simple infrared of 1945 to today's thermal imaging and image intensification systems. Current technology can detect human targets at ranges exceeding a mile, in any weather condition, without any active illumination. The capability gap first demonstrated on Okinawa has only widened, yet the fundamental lesson from Okinawa remains unchanged. The force that owns the night owns the battlefield. The Japanese infantry who faced infrared snipers were the first to learn this harsh truth of modern warfare. Beyond statistics and tactics, the infrared sniper scope's impact got measured in human terms. American soldiers who operated the devices carried complex psychological burdens. Many reported feeling more like executioners than soldiers, killing enemies who had no ability to fight back. Post-war psychological studies of sniper scope operators found higher rates of combat stress compared to regular infantry. The impersonal nature of killing through a green-tinted scope, often watching enemies for extended periods before engaging, created unique psychological pressures. Veterans described the difficulty of watching Japanese soldiers prepare positions, eat meals, or write letters before killing them. For Japanese forces, the psychological impact was different but equally profound. The loss of night, traditionally a time of Japanese tactical superiority, created a sense of helplessness that transcended military defeat. Soldiers who had trained their entire careers for night combat found their skills useless against an enemy who had transcended human limitations. Military historians studying Okinawa's night battles identified crucial lessons that shaped doctrine after the war. First, technological surprise multiplies through psychological impact. The actual number of infrared devices was limited, but fear of the capability paralyzed Japanese operations everywhere. Not knowing where the technology existed proved more damaging than the technology itself. Second, disrupting fundamental tactical assumptions can collapse entire military systems. Japanese doctrine assumed night combat would always favor superior training over technology. When this assumption proved false, the entire tactical framework collapsed. Third, information dominance, seeing while remaining unseen, provides advantages that transcend firepower. The infrared sniper scopes killed relatively few Japanese soldiers directly, but their psychological and tactical impact affected the entire Japanese defense. The full story of infrared employment on Okinawa remained classified for decades. Key documents only got declassified in the 1990s, including the technical manual detailing the sniper scope system, after-action reports from the 96th and 7th Infantry Divisions, intelligence summaries from the Allied translator and interpreter section, and post-war interrogation reports from the Strategic Bombing Survey. These documents reveal both the revolutionary nature of the technology and the lengths taken to protect it. Even after the war ended, details about infrared capabilities remained restricted. Veterans were discouraged from discussing their experiences with the devices. This security consciousness indicates how valuable they considered the capability for future conflicts. The one-sided nature of infrared combat raised ethical questions that persist in modern warfare. Is it ethical to employ technology that removes the enemy's ability to fight back effectively? The infrared sniper scope operators on Okinawa wrestled with this question nightly. Military ethicists after the war have debated whether such overwhelming technological advantages constitute honorable warfare. Some argue that any advantage that saves friendly lives is justified. Others contend that warfare requires some element of reciprocal risk to remain legitimate rather than simple execution. The Japanese perspective, expressed through military writings after the war, generally accepted the technology as a legitimate evolution of warfare. The shame wasn't in facing superior technology, but in failing to anticipate and prepare for it. The infrared sniper scope was seen as another example of American material superiority, frustrating but not illegitimate. The infrared sniper scope's success on Okinawa influenced American military development for decades. The emphasis on maintaining technological superiority, particularly in sensors and information systems, traces directly to lessons learned in 1945. The concept of owning the night became central to American military doctrine. Investment in night vision technology continued through the Cold War and beyond. Each generation of technology widened the gap between those who could see in darkness and those who couldn't. The advantage first demonstrated with primitive infrared devices on Okinawa has become a defining characteristic of American military superiority. For potential adversaries, Okinawa demonstrated that traditional advantages in training, motivation, or tactical doctrine could be negated by technology. This lesson influenced military development worldwide, spurring investment in night vision and other sensor technologies. The revolution that began with 150 primitive infrared devices has shaped global military competition ever since. Based on declassified documents and technical manuals, the actual specifications of the T3 or M3 carbine with infrared sniper scope were weight of approximately 28 to 30 pounds for the complete system. Effective range from 70 yards in poor conditions up to 125 yards in ideal conditions. Battery life of 20 to 30 minutes continuous use or 3 to 4 hours intermittent. The RCA 1P25 image intensifier tube, a 6-volt lead-acid battery pack for power, a sealed beam lamp with infrared filter as the infrared source, and production numbers of approximately 1,700 scopes manufactured with 150 deployed to Okinawa. These specifications, while primitive by modern standards, represented revolutionary capability in 1945. The ability to engage targets accurately at 70-plus yards in complete darkness was unprecedented in infantry combat. The introduction of infrared night vision technology during the Battle of Okinawa marked a turning point in military history. For the first time, technology allowed one side to completely dominate darkness, traditionally the domain of superior training and individual skill. The Japanese infantry, masters of night combat for 40 years, discovered that their greatest tactical advantage had become obsolete overnight. Approximately 150 infrared-equipped carbines, operated by specially trained American soldiers, contributed to a fundamental shift in the Pacific War's final battle. While accounting directly for a relatively small percentage of total Japanese military casualties, these devices achieved something far more significant. They broke the Japanese military's confidence in their ability to fight effectively. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical effects. Japanese forces abandoned night operations, their primary tactical advantage, across the entire front, not just where infrared devices were present. Supply lines were severed, positions became isolated, and coordinated defense became impossible. The sophisticated tactical system that had served Japan throughout the war collapsed in the face of American technology that seemed to transcend human limitations. Colonel Yahara wrote in his memoir that the Americans had conquered nature itself, turning their ally darkness into an American weapon. He said they faced not just superior firepower, but superior science, and that against this, courage alone meant nothing. The American soldiers who operated these first night vision devices were pioneers in a new form of warfare, one where information dominance mattered more than firepower, where seeing meant winning. Their experiences, both the tactical successes and the psychological burdens, established patterns that continue in modern combat where technology provides overwhelming advantages. The Battle of Okinawa proved that technology could fundamentally alter the nature of warfare. The infrared sniper scope didn't just provide a tactical advantage, it destroyed an entire military doctrine built over decades. Japanese forces who had perfected night combat since 1904 found themselves helpless against American soldiers who could see in the dark. The numbers tell only part of the story, 150 devices causing 30% of night casualties in the first week and a 78% reduction in Japanese night operations. The real victory was psychological, the complete demoralization of an enemy who realized their training, courage, and tactics were useless against American technology they couldn't understand or counter. From April to June of 1945, the night battles of Okinawa demonstrated a fundamental truth that remains relevant today. In modern warfare, the side that can see while remaining unseen doesn't just possess an advantage, they own the battlefield. The primitive infrared sniper scopes of 1945, weighing 30 pounds and seeing only 70 yards, began a revolution in military technology that continues to evolve. The Japanese infantry never expected American carbines to see 70 yards in darkness. That failure of imagination, combined with American technological innovation, contributed to ending the Pacific War and established the template for American military superiority that persists today. In the green-tinted world of those first infrared scopes, American soldiers glimpsed the future of warfare, a future where technology would matter more than numbers, where information would matter more than firepower, and where owning the night would mean owning victory. The lessons from Okinawa's night battles echo through every modern conflict where one side possesses overwhelming technological advantages. The infrared sniper scope was more than a weapon. It was a glimpse into a future where warfare would be dominated not by who could fight harder, but by who could see farther. The Japanese soldiers who faced this technology in 1945 were the first to learn what every military force now knows. In the age of technology, darkness no longer provides cover, and the side that cannot see has already lost. This transformation from darkness as sanctuary to darkness as vulnerability represents one of the most significant shifts in military history, and it all began on a coral ridge in Okinawa, where a Japanese officer wrote with trembling hands about Americans who could see in the blackest night.